Hello and welcome to this week's edition of The Briefing Room. I'm Bill Froehlich, your host from WTCM, and I'm joined this week by Vanessa Fayz from 9 and 10. Welcome back, Vanessa.
Thanks for having me.
And Pat Sullivan from Northern Express. Pat, thanks for coming in.
Hi, Bill.
Appreciate you guys coming in with us. It's our weekly roundup of some of the stories that are making headlines across northern Michigan, and we've got once again a full slate of stories to talk about. We're going to start this week with one of the, we almost called it a cold case in some senses, but it wasn't necessarily cold. Somebody was convicted for a 1996 murder in Kalkaska, but I guess the case has never really been put to bed. So let's talk a little bit about what happened with Geraldine Montgomery in Kalkaska back in 1996. There is a person in jail for her murder. Pat, you told me you were in town a couple years after that murder and covering kind of the fallout from it, still as it was making headlines back then. But again, someone's already sitting in jail, yet there's been another arrest.
It was, first of all, it was one of these terrible murders. This older woman in her house, somebody comes in and brutally murders her, and I guess put her in her trunk. And so it was kind of one of these things that terrified the people in Kalkaska, and they definitely wanted to catch who did it. And there was a lot of pressure on the police and the prosecutor to catch the person who did it. They wound up arresting Jamie Peterson, I think is his name.
Yep.
And he eventually confessed, and he was tried and convicted. But there have always been questions about whether or not he was involved, because finally when they tested the DNA, there was none of his DNA at the crime scene, but there was DNA at the crime scene. There were questions about his confession, because he had some mental illness problems, and he gave varying versions of what happened, and there were questions about whether the police fed him the information and whether it was a legitimate confession. So all of these years, there have been people, including the victim's family, who didn't feel that the right person was caught.
We got the press release the other day, and Vanessa, you know as well that it listed Jamie Peterson's name as he's kind of serving time for this, but they've arrested a second suspect, and they've just kind of they've been working this case quietly ever since. And there was a development, what was it, in May, when they took this new DNA evidence. What was your first reaction just when you heard this 15, 17-year-old murder case coming back out?
My first reaction was how crazy for the family, because to not really know, or to always have those questions. But then I'm curious to see what happens with the person, because Jamie's serving life for this. So I'm curious to see how that all plays out, because I read somewhere they were saying there was multiple suspects. Am I right?
Well, originally, I think the original theory of the prosecution was that Jamie Peterson did it alone, and then when the DNA evidence came back and said that it wasn't Jamie, then the theory became that there was a second person involved. But that's where that theory came from.
I think you're right, though. Will there be a new trial? Will he
Right.
just be completely set free? I mean, that's kind of what we're interested in seeing what happens
Yeah,
next.
and if he is, proven innocent and exonerated for this, that's just very strange to me that he's serving all this time. He served all this time
And made a
for a
confession,
crime
too,
that he didn't commit.
And I think another interesting element to this would be that the prosecutor in Kalkaska County who prosecuted Jamie Peterson died, 2 years ago in a cross-country skiing. He died of a heart attack while he was cross-country skiing. And he was definitely the driving force between the prosecution and of fighting the appeals, and he was leading that fight. Now it's up to his replacement whether or not he wants to be as aggressive as Brian Donnelly was.
Yeah. What do you remember, Pat, and I don't know when you started in the Traverse City area, but what do you remember about those conversations, either at the trial time or shortly after? What sticks out in your mind about the doubts that were raised back then?
I remember that there were jurors who later came out and said that they had doubts. They had voted to convict, and they said that they no longer believed their verdict. I remember that in and around Kalkaska, there was a bad feeling about this case, like that this troubled guy, and there was no question Jamie Peterson was troubled. Like he he was an odd character, and he was a troubled guy outside of this, but people just had a bad feeling about this.
So we don't really know what happens next. We had first court appearance this week for Ryan. What's his name now? It escapes me.
Yeah, he's got a prelim coming up.
Jason Ryan.
Jason Ryan.
In mid-December, he's got a prelim coming up. Typically, in a case this complicated, those will get adjourned while the defense tries to figure out what its strategy is going to be. But
I don't recall how old he is.
He's 35.
Okay, the mugshot photo they sent us didn't look all that old.
No,
So we're talking him being a teenager.
Younger, right?
Yeah, at the time. Kind of remarkable. Another court case going on this week. We had the sentencing for Traverse City Mayor Mike Estes, sentenced for his impaired driving conviction. 18 months probation, 3 days community service, no jail time. Mixed reaction kind of on social media and comments on, I think, our respective websites. Any reaction from you guys to that sentence? And I guess the other thing, Mike Estes has repeatedly said he wasn't going to talk about it. Kind of held true to that, just walking right past reporters outside the courtroom in silence. Just made a beeline for the door and didn't say anything to us.
Ever since he's been about anything, he's been quiet. I cover a lot of the commission meetings, and I can't get a comment about anything since then. So it's been interesting. I think it was interesting that he was sentenced as far as probation a little longer than I think people were expecting. So
I think that there's, if you read social media and you read the comments under stories, there is a perception that he's being treated lightly and he's getting let go because he's connected and he's the mayor. That's not what happened. He got more probation than a typical case gets. This was a first offense. I know people say that he had that other thing in Antrim County years ago. That wasn't a drunk driving conviction. So normally, if a normal person walks into court, that's not going to be a factor in their case. So I think he was, the system. He went through the system just like anybody does.
I completely agree. Yeah.
Yeah, it does seem that way, and the judge pointed out that the kind of the max for most people in this circumstance would be a year probation, so we're up to 18 months. He was facing up to 93 days in jail, though. I mean, potentially it could have still been different, which I think is why people seem to be reacting.
That's what it says in the statute, but that's not what that's there for extreme cases or for people who violate their bond or violate probation, and then they wind up serving part of that time.
Right. It's rare to see a DUI go to jail for, I think, serve jail time.
It's interesting, though. I mean, the fact that he's not talking, the fact that he's never addressed this, and that he's quiet about other things.
Quiet.
What's going to happen with that?
I was kind of surprised that he didn't make any statement in court other than he said, I've addressed the public and the court on this, and I have nothing further to say.
And that's interesting because it was like when he did the press conference, he's like, there'll be a time to address this in court, and I'm not going to talk about it now. And then he gets to court and he's like, I addressed this earlier, and
I'm not going to talk about it. Yeah, and I was talking with a colleague about this yesterday. It would almost be, I don't know, satisfying enough if he would just say, this, sentencing is behind me. I'm looking forward to putting it behind me and getting help and getting treatment, and that's all I'm going to say.
Or
that would be something that would be enough.
What is he afraid of about taking questions? Like, he could say, I had too much to drink. I drove. I feel terrible about it. It was a horrible thing to do. What question is he afraid of being asked?
I don't know.
Yeah, that's the thing. I'm not sure, and it is clearly. I mean, from my perspective, after that was all said and done, he was reelected. I was covering simple issues at the commission meeting, and it was like, I don't have time. I have to go to the meeting, and that's never happened before. He's always had time. So it was interesting. It's like maybe he feels that I'm going to slip a question in there, but really I'm not there for that. So it's been a little weird.
But it is hard, and I expressed this in an email to him. It must have been right around the time of his press conference outside the governmental center. It is hard for us to just, for me at least, to just move on and say, hey, what's happening with the latest downtown development? even though you're not talking to us about anything,
Right.
about the issue of the day. And it almost seems like it's more frustrating, for me at least, that even a simple 2-sentence statement would kind of put the issue to rest in terms of him commenting or not commenting.
And or if he would have taken questions at the press conference, maybe he wouldn't feel so uncomfortable when you're approaching him about
that's the
stuff
thing.
if he's going to continue on in his position, he's going to need to communicate what he's doing.
Exactly, I completely agree. And he's always been great with us, always. We've never, I remember when Jared Ottenwest got brought here as city manager, the first interview I had with him, the mayor was kind of standing near, and he told him, you really communicate with the media. We have a great relationship with them, so it makes my job a little hard that I can't get a comment from him on anything. And really, those meetings, I'm strictly there for what's the issue that I'm there for. So
Right.
I just wish that he would talk again.
Yeah, and he's always been great with us too. So it's just a little bit different depending on the circumstance or the issue. So of course the question then that's still out there is, does he intend to stay on as mayor? Or is there the possibility that he could still decide to step down? I mean, he's got 18 months of probation and things he's got to do now in terms of the terms of his probation. Will that, quote unquote, distract from his duties? Will this be something that makes him step down? I mean, that's kind of always been speculation too, even when he decided not to leave the race, was that at some point he may still step down and leave it to the city commission to fill that seat. So we're still watching that, I guess.
We'll find out.
Yeah.
All right, I want to talk about, while we're talking about the governmental center, the other issue going on inside that room, that building last night, the county budget. Vanessa,
it's been heated.
You covered that. What, we're $1.5 million in the hole and trying to figure out how to make up that gap.
Yeah, and last night was supposed to be there was supposed to be a decision last night, and there was not. No agreement could have been reached, so we're still kind of back to square one as to how to deal with this. It's been, and now they're facing a lawsuit. Herb Lemcool is kind of under fire right now for the meeting a couple weeks ago. There was 150 people there. It was jam-packed, and he had limited the public comment, which a lot of people thought was necessary because it was a 4-hour meeting as it was. And then last night there was less people, but still a pretty heavy amount. And they had 2 public hearings to kind of talk about pension bonding and then talk about the budget as a whole. And it's strange because a lot of people don't want pension. They don't want them to bond out, but they also don't want cuts to any departments. So it's kind of like it's one or the other. And Herb last night said, for the ones of you that there's a petition going around apparently saying don't bond. And he said, but you're also the same people saying you don't want us to cut the sheriff's department or Parks and Rec, and we have to cut something if we're not going to bond out. So they're really, it's a very hard decision, and you can tell none of them want to make it. So they keep just going back and forth. And yesterday there was a motion moved to approve the budget as it is now, and then just take money from the fund balance and borrow. But a lot of the commissioners are not okay with that because they feel this is just prolonging the inevitable, and then next year they're going to be right back to square one, and so they couldn't come to an agreement. So we're still waiting to see what's going to happen.
We could have maybe we'll have to raise the county debt ceiling before the end of the year. What was the process last night in terms of public comment? How much did they allow? How far did it go?
It was 3 minutes like the normal public comment, 3 minutes per person. So
did everybody speak that wanted to, or was there cut off?
Yeah.
How long did the meeting go?
Well, I had to leave. I mean, it started at 7 and it was still going on we didn't leave till 8:45. But they had started to move on to other topics then. So the budget part of it seemed to be pretty well over. But then there was another public comment session at the end, like there always is, and I don't know if anyone commented then. So I'm sure it was a few hours, probably 2, at least 2.5. But because it wasn't as many people. I mean, the meeting a couple of weeks ago, there were people out by the elevators. Like they had to open the doors and there were chairs out there. It was packed. It was people sitting on tables. Like it was just crazy. And so that one took forever. But yesterday, everyone that wanted to talked, I think. And the commission all went around and kind of gave their opinion. But basically, they had a public comment in the beginning that was just, a couple people talked about what, other ideas that they could kind of pursue. And then they had the 2 public hearings. One was focused on, pension bonding and is this a good idea? And the next was just the whole budget.
Well, it's times like that when it makes me wonder, both a couple of weeks ago and last night, how many people are able to tough it out long enough to make that public comment. It's one thing to be a commissioner and sit for a 2 or 3 hour meeting. It's another thing to be a citizen who's got places to go, things to do, kids to put to bed. I mean, how can you stand there for 3 hours waiting your turn?
It's a rare issue that brings out a crowd for a meeting that's going to last that long.
Yeah, 4 hours.
The other thing that kind of just stunned me, and Herb Lemkool told us this a couple weeks ago on WTCM, and then I saw it again in the paper just this week, so he said it twice now, is he had felt strongly that it was important to limit public comment because he wanted the commissioners to have time to talk about the budget and felt that that was more important. And that, I think, maybe is part of the reason behind this lawsuit. People didn't take too kindly to that notion of public comment is not as important.
Right. But that was a.
As somebody, I haven't covered any of these meetings, but I've covered meetings before, and they can't last forever. I mean,
That's the thing.
if there's 100 people and everybody wants to speak for 5 minutes, where does that put you?
I mean, at midnight, essentially, maybe later. I cannot express how, I've never seen that many people in the government center at one time. And he said he was going to limit the whole session to 15 minutes, but it ended up going for almost a half an hour. So he did allow more people. I mean, a lot of people talked. I don't know. I have mixed feelings. I just don't know. As media, I know I was sitting there like, yay, because we have deadlines. And I mean, I go there and then I have to get it on the air the same night. And that night was just a huge time crunch for us. And I was just thinking like, I can't believe, and then I found out the next day that it was 4 hours. I said, oh my gosh, they were there till 11:30. So it's just a lot. And I think that, I don't know that it was necessarily said the right way on his part, but I know that they're all very distressed about this. They don't want to make cuts. They don't know what to do. So, I mean, you can see it just with them sitting there and they some of them are going back and forth. Yeah, let's take the bond. Well, I need more information. Let's borrow from the general fund. Well, I don't think that's the best idea. Should we make cuts? We should make cuts. I don't know if we should. It's constant.
And as someone who's been involved in meetings, obviously not government meetings, but one of the frustrations I imagine they have is a lot of the public comments get redundant. Yeah. And it's not that you don't want to hear them, but it's if 100 people line up and all say the same thing, it's, yes, we understand.
Right.
Show of hands, who feels that way? Okay, let's move on. I mean,
exactly.
It's hard to get through a lot
They
of that.
actually did that at that meeting. They said, how many of you are here to talk about Parks and Rec? And almost everyone in the room raised their hand. So you're figuring a lot of the comments were going to be, don't cut Parks and Rec, don't do this. So it's interesting. It seems like the majority of people do not want cuts to any department. There were a couple last night that came up and said, we have enough police, we have enough whatever. So it should be interesting.
All right. Well, speaking of police, let's shift gears and talk about, Pat, your story from this week. Police stopping a alleged drunk driver in a
he was drunk.
rather unusual fashion. All right. Fair enough, but an unusual situation nonetheless.
It was unusual.
Tell us about the cover story this week.
I guess there are a couple of things that are interesting about this. One of them is that this is a guy who suffered a closed head injury, the defendant. So he has, he's disabled, and he has trouble getting around. He can walk around on his own, but he has trouble, and he uses a walker, and he uses a mobility scooter to get him around longer distances. He can't drive, so this is what he uses to get around Traverse City. It goes about 4 miles an hour. And one day back in September, I guess it was a Sunday afternoon, about 6 o'clock in the evening, Sunday evening, beautiful day, he went to the grocery store in Garfield, the Save-A-Lot, caused kind of a commotion. He got kicked out there. He was drinking. He admits he was drunk. He had a 24-ounce can of beer with him, and he decides, I think, from what I understand, he decides he's going to go get a sandwich down at Burger King. So he takes Garfield and he's going along and having a good time.
On the sidewalk?
No, there's no sidewalk there.
Okay, so he's in the roadway.
He's in the road.
Okay.
and drinking a beer, swerving, having a good time. According to the police, backing up traffic, causing cars to have to swerve. They come and they pull him over. They arrested him for drunk and disorderly. And so it set up, then the prosecutors reviewed the case and they decided to charge him with drunk driving. Since it would have been his third offense, it was felony drunk driving, which could have put him in prison if he was convicted. And so he needs a court-appointed lawyer, and there are 5 or 6 guys that could have been, I think they're all guys at district court. There might be a woman. The one that he draws just by chance is Dave Clark, who also happens to be in a wheelchair. So for him, he can kind of relate to this case. And so he aggressively fought the charges. He filed a motion in district court. He filed a motion in circuit court saying this isn't what was meant by, he wasn't endangering anybody else. This is what was meant by the drunk driving law. And the circuit court judge, Phil Rogers, reviewed it. There was a hearing, and he looked at it and he said, he agreed with Dave Clark. He said, this isn't what the legislature meant. Nobody's been killed by one of these mobility scooters. And moreover, the prosecutors, if they want to get this guy, they've got the drunk and disorderly charge. They could charge him with drunk and disorderly. And that's what they should have done. So he kicked the charge out, and the prosecutors are considering whether to appeal or not. I talked to Bob Cooney, and his point was, and he said he really believes in this case that this guy was creating a public safety hazard because he could have
backing up traffic.
He could have caused a car crash or something, and I guess he could have, he was endangering himself. He believes that you shouldn't be able to be out there on the road using this thing to get from one point to another point on the road and be drunk and be able to get away with it, essentially.
So it's pending possible appeal, but right now it's done.
Right now it's done. Well, he also had some marijuana on him, so that part of there's a misdemeanor charge pending against him.
I think it kind of kicks it up a notch that we're talking about the third offense and potential prison time for this. That kind of intensifies the argument.
It puts it in a starker contrast, like the prison for riding in a wheelchair. And if you look at it, you can understand where the prosecutors are coming from, I think, and you can understand where this guy is coming from. He says that if there was a sidewalk, he would have been on the sidewalk. Who knows?
Do you know, were either of his previous 2 offenses, were they also involving a scooter? Do we know that?
I was just going to ask that.
No, I don't think they were. I don't know. I didn't go look at those files. But the guy's been in trouble a lot over the years. Like, I looked up his record in Grand Traverse County, and it was like there was a lot of little stuff. Nothing,
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Well, keep us in the loop on that if the appeal moves forward. I want to thank everybody for tuning into the briefing room this week. Thanks to Pat Sullivan and Vanessa Fayz. Thank you guys for coming in. And thanks for watching our roundup of stories that have been making headlines across northern Michigan this week. I'm Bill Froehlich from WTCM Radio. We'll see you next time right here on the briefing room.